The Brothers Karamazov, Book 2, Chapter 6. In review, Book 1 was a family history of the main players in the novel. Book 2, the action begins. Chapter 1, they make their way to the monastery. Chapter 2, at the monastery from the entrance into Father Zosima's cell. Chapters 3 and 4 of Book 2 take place outside, with Zosima first talking to 5 women, and then in Chapter 4 talking to a upper-class woman. Then he goes inside in Chapter 5, and Ivan is discussing his article with some monks. And now we're here in Chapter 6, still here in Father Zosima's cell, with Ivan debating or discussing with the monks about his controversial article about the relationship with church and state, controversial on a couple levels. Number one, that he's even speaking on the issue, and number two, the side he takes on the issue. Pyotr Musov is frustrated because he is not able to interject his opinion into the debate. He is an enlightened, educated man, and no one seems to care what he's thinking about. And Fyodor is frustrated because he's not the center of attention. And so as Zosima returns to his cell and is hearing this argument, now Dmitri finally arrives, and Dmitri arrives with an excuse, and the excuse is that Fyodor told him the wrong time, told him it was at 1 rather than 11, and Smirdyakov ushered him in the wrong time. That's a character that we will spend quite a few hours with going forward, so just tuck that name away. But anyway, here comes Dmitri. Now, there are 4 key things in this chapter, Chapter 6. Number 1 is Dmitri is described. Number 2 is a brief interchange between Ivan and Zosima. Number 3 is an interchange between Dmitri and Fyodor. And number 4 is Zosima's reaction to the interchange between Dmitri and Fyodor, and the aftermath of Zosima's reaction. First, as the chapter begins, Dmitri coming in and interrupting the discussion between Ivan and the monks about his article. Dmitri comes in and, as I just said, makes excuses, but then for the first time his physical appearance and personality are really delved into in the first couple paragraphs. And it says that he is a well-dressed, attractive man, but that he has dark eyes and that his personality doesn't fit the situations. His emotional reactions don't fit the situations. And so if you think of someone who is super creepy that you have seen in a movie or super creepy in real life, often it's because their emotional reaction doesn't fit the situation they're in. So if you see a serial killer portrayed in a television series, there'll be all sorts of ecstatic emotions amongst the normal characters, and this serial killer is displaying no emotion whatsoever. Or the opposite, where there is a very subdued emotional state among the normal characters, and this creepy fellow is overly excited. And so Dmitri sort of fits in that category. We know that because it says that people would be surprised when he would laugh. And so it looks like he's got this pensive, brooding, serious eyes and forehead, a furrowed brow of a forehead, and then all of a sudden he would just laugh. And so when you see someone whose emotions don't fit the situation, you assume that they are sort of an unbalanced or unstable type of person. So that's Dmitri, number 1, well-dressed, but his personality is unstable, unpredictable, and that makes me uncomfortable. So I don't think anyone feels really safe in the presence of someone like that, because you can never get a read on them, and therefore you don't know what's going to happen, and you have this sort of gnawing sense of that you don't trust the person emotionally because they are unstable. So number 1, that was a description of Dmitri. Then number 2, we get a little interchange between Ivan and Zosima. So this interchange is introduced because Pyotr, wanting to worm his way into the conversation of the previous chapter that nobody cares what his opinion is on, he starts trying to defile Ivan's character in front of the monks, I guess to make himself look better. And he says, well, if you think that his argument is stupid, you should realize that he doesn't believe any of it. And the reason I know he doesn't believe any of it is because he is the furthest thing from a Christian or a Christian thinker. In private, he confessed to me that he doesn't believe a word of it, and he also believes something controversial. So this first bit of the conversation is actually said by Pyotr, but it's descriptive of Ivan's belief, and Ivan doesn't disagree at all. So it's almost as if Ivan says this first part. And the first part is that if you don't believe in God, then there is no rationale or motivation for righteousness or love. And so the beginning piece of this second point, this interchange between Ivan and Zosima, is the claim via Pyotr that Ivan believes that if there is no God, life is meaningless. And so Ivan will be famous. He's world-renowned among unbelievers, atheists, for his arguments against the Christian faith in books that are to come. He attacks the Christian problem of evil, which is usually stated that you can't have an all-powerful, all-loving God and evil exist, and the particular evil that Ivan argues against the Christian God with is the suffering of innocent children. But much less famously, before Ivan ever attacks the Christian problem of evil, Ivan here states that there is a non-Christian problem of evil as well. And the non-Christian problem of evil is stated by Pyotr and affirmed by Ivan, which is to say this, that without God, you have no category for right and wrong. You have no basis to call anything right or wrong. If we are all just a bunch of biological accidents, if we are here for no purpose, then of course our actions are good ones of love and our bad ones of hate and murder and abuse. Ultimately, those consequences can add up to nothing if there is no divine purpose to our lives. So if we are just biological accidents, there's really no standard by which we could call something right or wrong or good or bad. Everything would just boil down to sort of a nihilistic opinion. And so we've seen that in history at the Nuremberg trials as the Nazis were on trial for their atrocious crimes. They argued that, well, we were the government in charge at the time, and so how can you say that we did something illegal or immoral? We are the very standard. We're the definition of morality and legality in our country. And no, the United States, the United Nations came together and said, no, that doesn't work. There is a morality that is universal. There is a universal law. The same defense was made by Saddam Hussein. He said, how can you call what I did to my own people, how can you call it immoral or unjust? Because I am the one who defines morality and justice. And again, countries came together and said, no, you can't do that. There is such thing as a universal moral standard of right and wrong. And Ivan is saying, no, that really doesn't work. You can't have it both ways. If you want to say that there is no God, if you want to say that Christianity isn't true, then you can't have a category for evil. And so pick rape or molestation or murder. The most you can say is that your society has decided against it. You don't have a category, a rational, logical category. In other words, there's nothing from science that can prove morality. You're making a value judgment, and your value judgment is completely arbitrary and opinion. And so Ivan is saying that that politically, that is why the state holds no sway or power, because they have nothing internal, nothing to bind a man's conscience. The only thing that really makes a difference, whether it's limiting evil through law or promoting good through love, the only way that that could ever really happen is if you think that life has a purpose and life has a meaning, and the only way that life has purpose and meaning is if you have an eternal life endowed by a creator. So first we got Dimitri's description. Second, now we have this interchange between Ivan and Zosima. And Zosima hears all that and he says, well, on the one hand, I agree with you. And on the other hand, that really sucks for you. And Ivan says, come again? What do you mean? That you agree with me on the one hand and that really sucks for me on the other hand? And Zosima says, because you're the very person that you're describing. You have a problem of evil. Your reason and your conscience don't sync up. In other words, you see that justice matters, that law and love, you see that those things matter, but rationally, you realize you don't have a category for that. And so it's the worst of both worlds when you see your unbelieving problem of evil, and yet you are an unbeliever. And Zosima puts his finger right on Ivan and says so, you must be a miserable person. Ivan, even though a young man, is a brilliant mind, and so he shoots back at Zosima immediately with this. Well, what else am I left with? How can I have any certainty? Where is your certainty of proof in the existence of God, much less in the Trinity and all the difficult biblical doctrines? How can I have certainty in this life? Zosima, an older man, has heard these kind of arguments before, so he shoots back at Ivan. Well, just as surely as you will have no certainty for the existence of God, just as certainly you'll never have certainty against. And so I don't think that Zosima is merely saying what you might think if you just read this chapter for the first time. I don't think he's merely saying, well, you can't prove God doesn't exist. I think Zosima is saying something much stronger than that. He's saying, you have a problem that there's no way out of. The problem we've already stated. That without God, you have no moral categories to call anything really right or wrong. And Zosima is saying, you've got a problem either way. And so wouldn't you rather live consistently with the way that you see that is right, that is according to the law of love? You even can put it in a thesis and support that thesis. You can even publish a persuasive article, but all the time you don't believe it. So that is number 2, the conversation between Zosima and Ivan. Now, before we move on to number 3, I want to note the irony here. So one of the greatest reading coaches in the last century, he just passed away, I believe it was 1.5 years or 2 years ago, Harold Bloom, one of his tips for interpretation, actually his number 1 tip for interpretation for reading great literature is always look for the irony. And so whether you're in a specific conversation or a chapter or a book or the whole novel here in the Brothers K, always look for the irony. Now, what is the irony? The irony is that Ivan is making this argument that without God, there is no logical basis for morality. The only basis for morality is one that either you made up or your country made up. But if you made it up or if your country made it up, then it's arbitrary. And basically, why should I listen to a moral judgment that you just invented? So be a nihilist. If there is no God, go all the way and be a nihilist and just admit that life has no meaning. Yet who has been the most annoying character in literature history in book 1 and 2 and in chapter 1 and 2 and 5 of this book? Well, Fyodor. And how is Fyodor living? Fyodor is living completely consistently with Ivan's worldview if it were logically carried out. And so the irony here is that Ivan is speaking with Zosima, who embodies the law of love, and he's arguing in his article essentially for Zosima's life. But Pyotr is accusing Ivan, and Ivan is admitting that he doesn't actually have a logical category. He can't get himself to rationally believe in Zosima's worldview. But what does he have? A physical, literal manifestation, i.e. his dad, of the logical consequence of not believing in Fyodor. If there is no God, Fyodor is exactly how you should live, a self-centered, drunken, orgy, lying, foolish type of life. And so recognize the irony there, that these are not just intellectual categories for Ivan, they're actually embodied in Zosima and Fyodor before him. So number one, Dmitri is described. Number two, Zosima and Ivan converse. And now number three, Fyodor and Dmitri converse. Now, Fyodor breaks in and jumps in. Nobody wants to hear Ivan and Zosima continue to debate because Fyodor hasn't got all the attention, and so now he starts to try to steer this morning back to its intended reason. So, what was the intended reason? The intended reason was that Dmitri and Fyodor come fight it out in the presence of Zosima and the other monks, and act as arbitrators in their dispute over money. So Fyodor surprisingly wants to steer the conversation back on track, and so in the third chunk that's important of four in this chapter, Fyodor begins to absolutely assassinate the character of his son. And so how does he do that? Well, he says, well, look, he's engaged to a perfectly nice young lady, a great young lady, a woman who is rich, of noble character. She's beautiful, she's wonderful, but there's only one problem. My son has no intention of marrying her whatsoever. So in essence, with all this girl's virtue, all my son has done is trap her in this engagement because she's living in a world that isn't the true world where she believes that Dmitri will marry her, and so she is not able to live her best life because she's being deceived by my son, Dmitri. Then he says, not only that, but my son is with this scandalous, pursuing this scandalous woman instead that doesn't hold a candle morally to the first young lady. We're going to learn in just the next chapter that the upstanding young lady that he is engaged to is named Katerina, and the looser, less upstanding seductress that he is pursuing, according to Fyodor, is Grushenka. And Fyodor is not done assassinating the character of his son. He's accused him of trapping the first young lady in a fake engagement, the second young lady in pursuing her illegitimately. And then third, he says, not only that, but there was a noble officer in the army who was doing a little bit work for me being Fyodor. And when Dmitri found out that we were connected, and the inquiry about the second young lady and some money related to Fyodor, when those things came out at a bar, my son Dmitri took an officer outside of the bar and grabbed him by the scruff of his chin hair and basically beat up and assaulted and accosted a war hero. So Fyodor wastes no time in assassinating the character of a son in those three ways, and really four ways, because he weaves out money issues between all three of those things. Now, Dmitri is amazed and confused because he gave his dad too much credit. He didn't think that this is the way the conversation would go. And spoiler alert here, this is Dmitri for chapters and chapters in the future. Yes, but no. No, but yes. His response is, well, superficially, there's an appearance of truth to all these things, but if you would just sit and hear me out, I could clear this up if you could see what the real story is. And of course, that will be the plot of the Brothers K, or at least one of the main parts of the plot, is Dmitri defending himself against these type of accusations and how these accusations play out. But for now, he rebuts them. And he's saying, no, it's true, but it's true in a completely twisted way that makes it completely untrue. What is Fyodor's response to his son? If you weren't my son, I would take you out and we would have a duel. We need a duel. And so Dmitri's mad and Fyodor's mad, and Fyodor is taking this his part of the victim to the extreme and saying that he wants a duel with his son. And Dmitri is beyond upset because he has a mix of a conscience and a temper. And now the main thing, number 4 in this chapter, Zosima looks at Dmitri. He looks at his conscience that is racked with guilt, his mind that is racked with confusion. He sees the anger boiling in Dmitri, this mixture of wanting to do the right thing, but not really having self-control, having this boiling rage of emotional anxiety and anger, yet trying to control it, but not being able to. He sees Dmitri just absolutely boiling, and the worst, the perfect storm is this situation, this environment with Fyodor just throwing lies and accusations at him. And Zosima walks across the floor, and this elder bows down at the feet of Dmitri all the way until some think that his forehead touches the floor. And so this is a confusing gesture, a confusing act. What does it mean? Zosima not resorting to words, not retreating, but rather going to Dmitri and prostrating himself, putting his head in reverence, in humility. What does it mean? What does this grand gesture that Zosima makes mean? And then as soon as he's done, this frail, dying man who's saying that he only has hours to live, he steadies himself, begins to stand up, and he even manages a smile, and he apologizes and takes his leave and walks out. And this leaves the room in great confusion and wonderment. What did the gesture mean? What was it symbolic of? And not only that, well, now I don't want to go to the dinner, the lunch that the Father Superior invited us to, and so Pyotr doesn't want to go, and Fyodor doesn't want to go. If Pyotr doesn't want to go, no, you go, no, you go, no, you go. And those are the 4 chunks that you need to take away from Book 2, Chapter 6. The description of Dmitri, both his appearance and his character. The back and forth between Ivan and Zosima, talking about the logical basis for morality, justice, and love. Number 3, the tense and bitter argument, the disgusting behavior that Fyodor showed toward Dmitri and Dmitri's wrathful, angry response. And 4th, Zosima's response to Dmitri's fits.